I have discovered the true origins of the orcs. J.R.R. Tolkien himself has struggled with this idea of their origin and has revised this a couple of times. Even the version in the Silmarillion is not his definitive answer to their origin. But I have found an answer to this question. In this video, we're going to cover Tolkien's process all the way from the first version of the origins of the orcs to the version of the Silmarillion. But there in the Silmarillion there is a flaw. Up next in the video we are going to discuss this flaw in high detail. I'll share to you my definitive answer on their true origins. Let me know what you think, what the orcs' true origins are. So we're going to go and start off this video with Tolkien's process, how he actually came to be to the version of the Silmarillion. And the origins of the orcs dates all the way back to the year 1917 till 1920, where Tolkien has described them as creatures created of subterranean heats and slime, and their hearts were made of granite and their bodies were deformed. It is said around these times that the Noldoli were mingled among these orcs and were confused and twisted, so they didn't really know what race they actually were, but that has nothing to do with their origins. They were actually created by Melkor. They were his children, just like the elves and men were the children of Iluvatar. Around the year 1930, Tolkien revised their origins once again, and there he still thought of them being created from stone created by Melkor, but this time their hearts were filled of hatred, and they were actually created in the fortress of Utumna, long before the awakening of the elves. And with the idea that their hearts were filled with hatred, he thought, why not being created after the awakening of the elves, but then in his fortress of Angmar, his second fortress, because then their hearts of hatred would be directed towards the elves, and this would explain why the orcs hate the elves so much. 7 years later, in the year 1937, he revised this once again. Here he played with the idea that they were created after the awakening of the elves, and that they were actually created in mockery of the elves, in mockery of the children of Iluvatar, but they were still created by Melkor. And this brings us all the way to the version that we can find right here in the Silmarillion. I'm going to read to you a passage about their creation, about the origins of the orcs. Yet this is held true by the wise of Eressëa, that all those of the Quendi who came into the hands of Melkor ere Utumno was broken were put there in prison, and by slow arts of cruelty were corrupted and enslaved. And thus did Melkor breed the hideous race of the orcs, in envy and mockery of the elves, of whom they were afterwards the bitterest foes. For the orcs had life and multiplied after the manner of the children of Iluvatar, and naught that had life of its own, nor the semblance of life, could ever Melkor make since his rebellion in the Ainulindale before the beginning, so say the wise. This is the version that we find and most of us know from the Silmarillion. But you have to look into the details. Tolkien himself wasn't really final with the idea of the origins of the orcs that is written here in the Silmarillion. Read the text carefully. It is said, yet this is held true by the wise. This means, according to the Valar, this is the origins of the orcs, but we do not know for sure. So in the version of the Silmarillion, the version we all know, these elves were corrupted and enslaved and eventually became the first orcs. But there is one huge flaw with this version, and that is simply, if the orcs were actually elves, then they must have Fëa as well, and Fëa is a spirit. The Fëa of the elves are bound to the world, are bound to Arda. The moment an elf dies in battle, their Fëa leaves their body and it is summoned in the halls of Mandos. And there it awaits until it receives a brand new body. So this means if the orcs are actually enslaved elves, that the orcs would have Fëa as well, and their Fëa would also be summoned in the halls of Mandos, which would be really weird. Most of the halls of Mandos being filled with orcs, because there are countless, hundreds, thousands of orcs had been slain over the course of the first, second and third age. So this is a theory that is not really possible, let's dive into this theory where we can find a better answer. So we know that Melkor cannot create. It is stated in the Silmarillion, only Eru Ilúvatar can create living things. Just like we see with Aule, the great smith of the Valar, he created the dwarves because he didn't want to wait until the awakening of the children of Ilúvatar. He created his own race, he created the dwarves. But Eru Ilúvatar was the only one who could give life to them. Okay, they moved when Aule thought of them. The moment that Aule stopped thinking about them, they would have lain still, motionless, waiting for doom to fall. So it was Eru Ilúvatar that gave them life, that gave them an individual mind to do what they want without someone thinking or controlling them. And this is the same with the race of the orcs. The orcs attack each other, do stuff that Sauron or even Melkor didn't want. This means perfectly that they are indeed living things, living creature, and that they were given life. Eru Ilúvatar wouldn't give the orcs life for itself because they are a mockery of his own children. So they must come from another race. Since we have stated earlier that the elves aren't really possible because of their Fëa, let's take a look at the other races that we know. These are the men and the dwarves. But first of all, let's take a look at the race of men. They are indeed a possibility, but I gotta say there's one clear answer that they are not. Because the first orcs were spotted during the years of the trees, and the first men only awoke with the rising of the sun, with the beginning of the first age. So this means that there is no possible way that men could be corrupted orcs. The only other race that we have left is the dwarves. There are two reasons why dwarves are not in any case related to an orc, are corrupted into orcs or whatever. Let's take a look at their physical structure. Their physical structure are completely different. And as you can see as well, and this will bring us to the second reason, they multiplied after the manner of the children of Ilúvatar, not the adoptive children of Ilúvatar. If we take a closer look in all the books of Middle-earth, there are 3 cases that men and elves multiplied together. And that is the relationship between Beren and Luthien, Tuatha and Idril, and Aragorn and Arwen. They are both men and elves coming together, getting married, getting children. We don't see that with dwarves and elves, dwarves and men. The reason that we don't see that is because their physical structure between the dwarves and the men and elves is completely different. Elves and men are both created by Eru Ilúvatar, so their physical structure is more or less the same. The only difference is that the elves are indeed bound to the world and will live forever and won't die of any disease or old age. This is not the case with the men. The men indeed die of old age, they can get sick, and they are not bound to their world. Only Eru Ilúvatar knows what becomes of the men after they die. Whereas the dwarves were created by Aule. Aule created them from the thought that what the children of Ilúvatar would have looked like, but he didn't know exactly how they looked like, how they were created. So their body is entirely different, and that is why no relationship can occur between men and dwarves or elves and dwarves, but they can occur between men and elves. But what has this to do with procreation with the elves and men and the orcs? Well, let's take a look all the way to the Third Age. Here we have Saruman in Isengard creating a new type of orcs. He created the Uruk-hai, and they were created of orcs and men breeding together. Saruman could mingle the orcs and the men just as you can mingle men and elves. So if we put one and one together, you can see that there is only one logical answer, and they must indeed be elves. The orcs must indeed be elves, but we still don't have an answer to the question on their Fëa. What happens to their Fëa? And there comes Morgoth into play. I believe that Morgoth has found a way to corrupt them, enslave them, torture them, that their Fëa is completely destroyed. That their Fëa is completely gone and they are just these orcs left. This is what's left of the elves. Their Fëa is completely broken and they are no longer elves. This is indeed the most cruel thing that Melkor has ever done. And I see you thinking, what has it to do? How do you know that Morgoth can actually break their spirit? So Morgoth was actually one of the mightiest Ainur that ever lived, one of the mightiest beings in the entire world of Arda. He knows a lot, he has a lot of different aspects from different Valar that he has combined within him, and that makes him one of the mightiest there is. I believe that he indeed found a way to break their Fëa, to break their spirit, and we can clearly see this with Sauron. Sauron was already a lieutenant of Melkor the moment that Melkor captured the elves. So I believe Sauron has seen how Melkor can do this. I'm not telling you that Sauron can do it, but he can do it to other races. Let's take a look all the way to the Third Age, where we can see the discussion between the mouth of Sauron and between Gandalf. There the mouth of Sauron says that they don't accept these conditions, then Frodo will be tortured and tormented as slow as possible until he eventually dies, or he is completely broken so Gandalf can see what he has actually done to Frodo. I know this is more of a threat as the mouth of Sauron says, but I do believe that there is a possibility that Sauron can do that. Break Frodo's spirit so he wouldn't even be recognizable to Gandalf or the rest. He wouldn't be the same anymore. And I believe that Sauron knows this, that Sauron has seen this once before when Melkor breaks their spirit of the elves. So that is why I believe that the true origin is that Tolkien was really close. I believe he was really close to the right answer, but the only logical answer is that they were indeed captured at Lake Cuvianen by Melkor and then in Utumno tortured, manipulated, tormented, enslaved, until their Fëa was completely broken. And there you have the first origins of the orcs. Afterwards they multiplied and multiplied and there came many orcs, but the first orcs were actually elves with a broken Fëa. I love to dive deep into this Middle-earth series and I really enjoyed this one. How to investigate, look it up, what actually could be possible. I have another theory video that I did a couple of weeks ago where I discussed actually if the Balrogs really have wings or not. I do the pros and cons. I will share to you my definitive answer if they actually have wings or not. So enjoy the next video.